Hello and welcome to Meet the Professors. I'm your host, Dean Emeritus Sachs, and today we're going to be talking about sexy media and sexy kids. I have two guests with me today. Both are media experts and professors. I have Ed Donnerstein, who is a past president of the International Society for Research on Aggression and a Dean Emeritus at the University of Arizona Department of Communications. I also have Victor Strasburger, who was the founding chief of adolescent medicine at the University of New Mexico and is currently a distinguished professor of pediatrics. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So today we're talking about the amount of sex on TV and other media, and I don't watch TV myself hardly at all. I haven't watched a single television show for years, but I flip channels once in a while and have been blown away at what I've seen on primetime television. I grew up with the Brady Bunch, the Waltons, Little House on the Prairie, and Leave It to Beaver, and Gilligan's Island. So that's pretty much all we had. And I remember when Love American Style came out, and my mom wouldn't let me watch it because she thought Love American Style was kind of racy. And I was like 12 or something, but describe how much sex is on television today.
15,000 sexual references a year on television alone that kids see every year. Most of them deal with suggestive sexuality. Very few, less than 10 to 12%, deal with what anyone would call responsible sexuality. So contraception, risk of pregnancy, risk of sexually transmitted disease. So the United States really has the most sexually suggestive television in the world, not the most explicit. There are other countries that show nudity and have no problem with that, but we are very suggestive. At the same time, we don't talk about birth control. We don't advertise birth control. We are absolutely gaga over ads for erectile dysfunction drugs. We spend $500 million on them, but to advertise birth control pills, that would give kids the wrong idea.
Yeah, and I think Vic's entirely right. One of the interesting things if you look at the content analyses, in other words, what is on, and people talk about it as embedded sexual content. So it's not explicit on commercial television, but the behaviors are occurring in the language. The interesting thing along the line of responsibility, that is, we don't use contraception, nobody gets pregnant, nobody gets an STD. Mm-hmm. It's in teen-related shows, that is, shows teenagers would predominantly watch, and the lead characters are teenagers. That's also very low in terms of the main character talking about, let's use contraception or something happened. Now, there are exceptions to the rule. I mean, Glee's a popular show I love, and they'll talk about it. But overall, it's 15% of shows might talk about some type of consequences. Vast majority, nothing happens to you.
And it's funny you mentioned the erectile dysfunction, because I was reading your book, I came across a cartoon with a little tiny kid walking into the pediatrician's office with his mom, and his mom is saying, well, doctor, why do you think that television's influencing my son? And the doctor says, your son walked in and said, is Cialis right for me? And I thought, oh my, this tiny, and they do that. They do mimic what they hear as kids. And one of the things I think is so interesting is the content analysis of sexuality in our culture, in our televisions. I read once, I think in your book, that they show non-marital sex 30 times more often than marital sex. Like marital sex is somehow boring, or no one wants to hear about that, or it's somehow gross, but non-marital sex among young, unmarried people is everywhere, which sends a message that it's normal, and that's how kids behave, and then, of course, kids end up behaving that way because they think it's normal.
Absolutely. And that speaks to the super peer effect of media, that the media function as a super peer, that we all acknowledge how important the peer group is in influencing teenage behavior. Think of the media as a super peer. Everybody's having sex. It has no downside, no consequences. Why aren't you out there having sex if you're 12, 13, or 14? Because all your friends are doing it. And in fact, there are studies that show that teenagers typically overestimate the number of their peers who are actually sexually active because they're watching the media, and everybody's having sex in the media.
And back to your notion about marriage. Yeah, I mean, what the content analysis showed, if you want to slow down your sex life,
Get married.
and get old, because the elderly don't have sex either, for the most part.
But isn't there also research showing that the people who report the healthiest and happiest sex lives are married people, which makes sense because they know each other and they know what each other likes. I mean, that to me, it's so ironic that we're sort of disseminating this message to the media that unmarried impromptu sex is the best or whatever, and that's really not accurate.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, the fact in the content analyses that teen shows actually have more sex than adult shows. I mean, by the time you get to be our age, don't you deserve to have a little sex in your TV shows? But teen shows have more sex, and yet we don't want teenagers to have sex until they're older and can use contraception responsibly and be in a committed relationship. It makes no sense.
And things have changed, you talked about. And nobody's saying go back 50 years. I mean, Vic's wearing his Lucy tie. But if you remember I Love Lucy, you couldn't even say the word pregnant.
Right.
They weren't sleeping, I think, even in the same bed. Now, we don't
Right.
want that at all.
Right.
Okay? I mean, you can be real, but part of the reality is also things can happen.
And they had to have one foot on the ground in a bed seat.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
Dick
I mean,
Van
you
Dyke
can't-
Show.
Yeah.
You can get pregnant. You can get an
Right.
STD. These are realities.
Well, this is the thing that I've done a lot of research on teen STDs, and it's absolutely horrifying, the rate of STDs. I mean, 1 in 4 new cases of STD is between the ages of 15 and 19. So our teenagers are 25% of the new cases, and they don't know. There's research has shown that they think that you can't get a disease unless you're doing something that could get you pregnant. Right. So they're doing other things that are, like anal sex, which is riskier than, traditional sex, and they don't understand that just because you can't get pregnant doesn't mean you can't get a sexual disease. And so they're just dropping like flies. I mean, 8,000 teenagers a year, 1 every 10 seconds in this country. We are by far the most sexually diseased country in the industrialized world. And I believe it does relate to the media and the messages being disseminated.
And one of the highest on teen pregnancy.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah, pregnancy
it's
too.
quote unquote gone
Right.
down, but as a country.
And that's now glamorized.
It's
teen moms or whatever. I've heard about these. I haven't actually seen them, but I've heard.
Pregnant at 16, teen mom, yeah.
Pregnant at 16.
Yeah.
Like it's somehow that maybe I can get on TV if I become a pregnant 16-year-old or something.
Yeah,
and-
there's some newer research suggesting it doesn't work the way some people might think it works, because it is. I can have my own reality show and kind of look at the endings of the shows. Everybody now gathers around this teen. She gets lots of reinforcement, lots of friends. The endings are actually happy. And if you think about this from how adolescents learn, this is a very positive type of outcome.
But that's
rather
not
than something
accurate.
negative.
Again, it's not.
Yeah,
Most
exactly
teens
right. Yeah.
who get pregnant struggle financially. I mean, statistically speaking, they're going to be behind the 8 ball from day one. They're probably not going to be able to complete college, or if they do, it's going to be delayed. And their income over a lifetime is drastically reduced by having a child as a child. And another thing I want to ask you about, I've done a lot of research on the pornography and the content analysis of pornography. And one of the most interesting studies I came across was where young men were shown, one pornographic film for about 30 minutes. And immediately after they saw that film, they reported loving their partners less, being less attracted to their partners in life, and basically having less respect for their real life partners because of the images and the hot-looking women in the porn flicks.
Right.
And it almost immediately had an effect on their perception and their love for their real life partner. So what do the content analysis tell us about the content of sex on television? Is it the same, or what?
You mean sort of pornographic types of
Well,
images?
no, I mean just in like pornography, there's been a lot of content analysis. I know it's changing too, but like for example, in pornography, the content analysis studies show that they portray impromptu sex with someone you just met, behind a tree in the woods as somehow the epitome of a sexual experience. They almost never use condoms.
Right.
And
Not
they
almost,
never
never.
show diseases that result when you act like that. They never show pregnancies that are unwanted that result when you act like that. And so the content of pornography is really, really grossly inaccurate in terms of what happens if you behave that way. You don't make friends. You don't have a great time. I mean, you might for a minute, but then there's consequences that are so profound that aren't being shown. So in the television, I mean, it's not as graphic, of course, but what kind of stereotypes or messages are being disseminated through television sex?
So you see, as you said, you see very few encounters between married couples. Most sex is between people who have just met or are casual acquaintances. No mention of birth control, no mention of risks. All of those things add up, and it makes you think about, okay, if we're going to show all this suggestive sex, why aren't we showing the solution, which is birth control? I mean, we are the only country in the world that thinks that giving kids access to birth control, and think of the media as one way to do that, makes them more sexually active. When they're seeing 15,000 sexual references a year that are mostly suggestive, irresponsible, that's contributing. There are now 20 studies using longitudinal data, so that can give you possibly cause and effect, that show that kids exposed to a lot of sexual content at a young age are more likely to begin having sexual intercourse at a young age.
Makes sense. I mean, they're learning
So-
that's what you do.
And less likely to use contraception.
Of course, they don't use it in the shows.
Yeah.
Some of them don't even know about it, and these kids are so young. And Meg Meeker is a pediatrician who's written books about teen sexuality, and one of the things that I read in one of her books was that the suicide rate among teens is a real problem right now. And one of the factors is they're being pushed into being sexual, and at the same time, they're being told, don't have sex. So it's they're getting these mixed messages, but I think the peer pressure really favors, expectations of sexual knowledge and being experienced. And these kids come into her office, as she describes, and they are very depressed. They feel disgusted by what they've done, and sometimes they feel suicidal, particularly when they end up with herpes. And they come in and say, give me a pill, I got this thing. And she tells them, there is no cure. You're gonna have it the rest of your life.
And it's interesting when shows actually incorporate the use of contraception into the show purposely, and they do follow-ups. It has an incredibly positive effect. There's a great series of studies with Friends, for instance, which is a show lots of teens like, and the characters get into a very humorous discussion of contraception not working and the condom kind of broken. They do it in a great humorous way. And in follow-up, they discovered that teens who looked at this began to really have discussion with their parents and others about the use of contraception and the efficiency of contraception and what to do. So the media can play an incredibly positive role. And they've also done it, with shows on ER and Grey's Anatomy, where they bury into the narrative something positive about if you use contraception or you take this particular vaccine, if you want to deal with HIV. Folks watch. There's millions of people watching the shows, and they can have a very beneficial effect.
Right. So I think about the media as now the leading sex educator in America today. And the idea that parents have that one semester-long sex education course is going to affect their kids, and that's an idea that began with my generation and Ed's generation. Well, that's
Way back.
way back. But the idea that one semester is going to affect your kids is ludicrous.
Right.
But 15,000 references a year is going to affect your kids. We have 20 research studies showing that, at least 20, and we have 100 showing it affects attitudes and beliefs. We don't do a good job of sex education. The media are now the leading sex educator, and that's not a very healthy statement.
Well, and the irony is the media has the power to go either way. I mean, if they wanted to be responsible, and some shows are, as you mentioned, some shows
absolutely.
bring up,
Absolutely.
right? But in general, for whatever reason, sex seems to sell, and showing irresponsible, impromptu sex seems to, or must sell if they're portraying it all the time.
Right.
They must. I mean, if anyone knows about what affects people's minds, it's the media and broadcast companies. They are loaded for
And you
one
can
thing.
do it in an educational, humorous manner. I mean, there's a great episode of Glee where somebody got an STD and he turns into the STD, and it's done to music and song, and you kind of laugh at it, but you go, boy, the message is there. And the message is, if you don't use contraception, look what's going to happen to you. You're going to be rejected. You're going to be ostracized for this occurring. And it's great that they do it, but that's a rarity on television.
And you can also use humor to advertise birth control. I mean, advertisers are brilliant, and they can advertise anything you want in a way that will be tolerated by the American public. And in fact, there are two good national surveys that the majority of American adults favor the advertising of birth control on TV, including the majority of American Catholics. And yet we don't do it in any systematic fashion.
Why is that? I mean, they could make money. I mean, Trojan condoms, for example, they're like the leader in condoms.
The
Couldn't they make
networks
more
are
money
scared.
if
the
they?
networks, programs and practices departments, which function as censors for each of the major networks, are scared. So you see an occasional ad for birth control,
At 2 in the
particularly.
morning.
Yeah, particularly for
When
birth
it's too
control
late, usually
pills.
by 2 in the morning.
But you will never hear the words prevent pregnancy in either a condom ad or a birth control pill ad, and that makes no sense.
Is it the influence of the Catholic Church? I mean, what is influencing?
It's the networks that are cowards to advertise birth control. They think there's going to be an outcry by the public. You can't do this. We're going to turn you off. You're going to lose advertising revenue. They're just scared.
But who are they cowering to? I mean, who is it? The moral majority? I mean, who's out there saying or creating some kind of a threat, implicit or otherwise, that if you do advertise contraceptives, you're going to be shut down, you're not going to get the business? I mean, who are they catering to? Because as you said, the public wants the ads.
The hidden Puritans among us. I don't know.
Although magazines, for particularly adolescent females, will discuss contraception much, much more. And in fact, lots of young, adolescent females will say, yeah, they get lots of information on birth control and other things from magazines. But traditional television, they really won't.
But they also get abnormal body self-images
that's the other thing.
from teen magazines. So it's a mixed blessing.
Yeah.
Well, that's something we were talking about earlier behind the scenes, about how women's body images are, being so harmed by the media because they portray the ideal. Research showed that little girls, the ideal woman is, 5'9", 110 pounds, blonde and blue eyes. Well, gosh, that sounds like a freak of nature to me. That sounds like
that's
one in a
almost
million.
my daughter.
And that gives all these little girls a standard they can't live up to, which creates low self-esteem. And we have a very depressed adolescent group in this country. We have a very big problem with the suicide rate, which has been sort of steadily climbing among kids as young as 11 years old, which is heartbreaking. And I think it seems to me that the media should show a little more responsibility in how they portray what's important in life. Because I can tell you from my friends, I have friends who are models and I have friends who are significantly overweight. There is really no connection between their physical appearance and the quality of their relationships. And some of my friends in the longest standing relationships and the happiest marriages, you would not look at them and say, oh, that's someone I want to look like. But they are happy, they are healthy, they are confident. And I wish we would get the media to start portraying what really matters in life. And that is developing yourself, your intellect, finding a good mate, and loving yourself and being able to love someone else. Because this whole idea of the body image taking over, and I mean, the breast implants, for example, is something that's always bothered me, because the research from all over the world says that women with breast implants are 4 times more likely to die of alcohol or drug abuse. They're between 3 and 6 times more likely to commit suicide. And these girls are running out to get breast implants thinking somehow, some way it's going to enhance their lives. But the research says just the opposite. And in fact, the longer a woman has breast implants, the higher her suicide rate goes up. So why isn't that being disseminated? These studies are all over the world for years, and no one knows this.
Ultra-thin is the gold standard.
Right.
And that's what
but with big breasts, which don't go together in nature.
Right.
That's just not how it goes.
Well, and the
swimsuit models.
The ultra-thin model doesn't go with reality. Now, there are some magazines, I think Vogue just started to ban or stop publishing these ultra-thin models. Israel has done it in their media, Britain. But lots of places still make that the ideal image that you want young adolescent females to emulate.
And they're still
when
growing.
It's totally unhealthy.
I mean, they need to eat, and they're so worried about their weight that they're not eating enough when they're in a developmental stage where their organs need the nutrition. It's so sad to me.
Yeah,
the bulimia rates, the anorexia rates, and just the studies on girls' self-images being so low.
There are hundreds of studies that the media contribute to abnormal body self-images among females, and probably dozens of studies that the media contribute to abnormal body self-images among males. So they need to be bulked up and have abs and six-packs and things like that. There are people in Hollywood who are concerned about this. Ed knows about the Gina Davis Foundation.
Foundation at
but they're in
USC
the
Annenberg,
minority.
Well, one of the things we're going to get into another show is the courts, the role of the courts in all of this. And one of the things that I've really struggled with in my research on pornography is the fact that, pornographers are extraordinarily wealthy companies. I mean, the pornography industry is bigger, get this, than Microsoft, Google, Amazon, eBay, Yahoo, Earthleak, and Netflix combined. That's how powerful these pornographers are. And, they've gotten really cocky. I mean, after the Communications Decency Act was knocked out, and the Child Online Protection Act was knocked out by the Supreme Court, they've been targeting kids, actually, like actually embedding words in their websites to get kids to come to the website inadvertently. And the research shows that the average age of first exposure is 11, and in 70% of those cases, they weren't looking for porn.
Right.
They were Googling things like, White House, and whitehouse.com back, several years ago, was a pornography site. And, the owner got rid of the site when his kid turned 4 because he didn't want his kid to be, somehow related to that or whatnot. But, some pornographers have actually been prosecuted for mouse trapping. Have you heard of mouse trapping, where you get into the website and you can't get out? And this is how the parents are finding out. The kid gets into a website by researching beavers, for example, looking for a research project at school, or White House, or they embed things like Britney Spears, Power Rangers into their websites to draw kids in. They actually research and find out the most searched terms by children and put those terms in their website to draw the kids in.
I do an online example in class where I say we've just studied violent pornography. So let's get on Google and type in the word aggressive pornography. As soon as you do it, the first page of Google has nothing but academic publications. Okay, straightforward. So I say, let's just abbreviate it. Let's just say aggressive porn, and let's type that in. The first page is entirely pornographic.
Right.
It's just, graphic, violent rape scene after another that appears. And you're right, there's a lot of it which is unintentional, although now there's a lot of research indicating teens especially are searching this stuff quite intentionally, easy to get.
What is the answer, do you think? I mean, how do we help kids to see sex in a healthy manner, to see themselves in a healthy manner? Is it primarily the parents' job, the pediatrician's
Hollywood
job?
wants it to lay the blame on the parents.
Right.
Parents can't do it all. Parents have less and less control these days because kids are spending more time with the media. So the media need to be more responsible.
Right.
Yes, parents need to keep technology out of the bedroom. That's what the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends. I will bet you both my mortgages that if you have a 14-year-old son and he's got a computer in his bedroom, he's looking at pornography.
Wow.
That's just the way of the world. This is sex education. The media represent sex education. And so schools need to do their part. We do such a poor job of sex education in America. And we need to understand that kids are getting that education in an unhealthy way. We need to make it healthy.
It means that's entirely right. Recent surveys on adolescents who go online intentionally to get
Right.
porn. What is two of the best predictors? There's some technology in the bedroom.
Of course.
Because they're anonymous.
No one can
and it's
see them.
And
Right.
it's ubiquitous.
Right.
It's 24/7. That's a
Right.
given. It's not the old pornography of our grandfathers, the Playboy under the bed. It's there in front of you. And mobile devices with internet access.
Right.
Because it is 24/7. It's anonymous. You get reinforcement from your peers, and mom and dad don't know. And those become really great predictors of
Well, another thing that I find very, very disturbing is that, as in the tobacco industry, where they target kids for their ads because they know that kids are more likely to become addicted, and once they are addicted, it's going to be hard to stop. And Congress has made these findings. I mean, in a case called Morse versus Frederick, they talked about these findings. We know this stuff. And so the pornographers are targeting kids because they know if they get addicted, they're going to have a long-term customer, just like the tobacco companies. And it just seems to me there should be some kind of public outrage that our kids are being targeted in this way.
The problem is, as Ed, I think, well knows, is that the internet was specifically set up to be unregulatable. So you can't outlaw pornography. You can't put it in an XXX domain.
High on a shelf.
If there are pornographers, in Europe or in Asia, what do they care about United States laws? It is unregulatable,
Right.
and we've got to deal with that. Parents have to deal with
and
that.
a lot of it's amateurs. I mean, PornTube, for instance. I mean, upload.
Or YouPorn. I heard about YouPorn, yeah.
Sorry, YouPorn. YouTube. How do you know about that?
My students told me. I'd written on pornography, and they said, "Have you ever seen it?" And I said, "No,
Yeah.
I had never seen
I
online
don't-
porn."
I
They
don't
said, "You
know
better get
about it."
online and find out about
these are
it."
amateurs who
Yeah,
just
I know.
post
I
online.
know.
How do you? I don't know how you regulate that at all. And you sort of think about the material. My concern would be very graphically violent material, obviously, or child porn.
Right.
How do you regulate it when it can come from anywhere? The net wasn't designed to deal with that.
Well, then it's going to
system.
have to be about teaching kids about what it can do to them. They're going to be curious. We used to dog ear the National Geographic. My mom would say she would laugh so hard. When we were like 12 and 13, she'd come home and we'd have dog eared every single naked
Right,
photo
all
of
the
every
bare
in the
breasts.
National Geographic because we were curious. That was just
Absolutely.
girls, little girls. And so the kids are going to look at the
But you also have to understand the pornography research, which Ed was very involved with for a long, long time, and it is not easily accessible, that research. People don't understand it. But basically, violence against women is far more significant than what you'd call soft porn, softcore porn or people making love or something like that, that doesn't have an effect as much as treating women poorly in pornography.
And a lot of the new research being done, for years you couldn't look at individuals under the age of 18. Now there is a whole body of research, cross-sectional studies, but also more important, longitudinal studies following teens up for 3 or 4 years. And it all says if you're getting online and you're getting hold of violent material, you are sexually coercive. You're using sexual aggression. Your attitudes about women are much, much different. No surprise here. Why should we be surprised? You're also less likely to use contraception. Duh, you're right. There is no contraception for the most part in pornography.
It's not sexy. It's kind of,
yeah, it's
right,
not
it's
sexy
not
at all. And multiple sexual partners, lots of things. And the same problems one would have with embedded material, you're now getting with much more explicit material, which is easily accessible, much more arousing, and giving particularly 13, 14-year-olds, both males and females, by the way, not exactly the correct message. And again, that wasn't an issue 10 years ago. It was difficult to get the material. Now, you don't even have, you have what, you talked about this constantly, can't get out of it, but you don't even have, you have to be 18, maybe you have that, but there's no checks and balances on the system.
Well, one of the things I find just outrageous is, prosecuting teens for sexting.
Yeah.
We're like shoving sex down their throats as children. And then when they do, monkey see, monkey do, what they do what they see, they're being prosecuted, being labeled sex offenders at age 16. They're kids. I mean, they should, I don't think there should be any prosecution of sexting among children.
States are trying, I know in the famous Florida case, they finally changed it because the laws are written for pedophiles. They were not written for two quote-unquote stupid teens sending pictures. And a lot of times not even pictures, it's also messages. And I know in Arizona, my home state, it's a slap on the hand the first time, unless somebody's overage and sending something underage. That's a different story. Second time around, no. And I think teens have got to realize, we're kind of changing the laws in some states, not everywhere, but they have to realize, look, once that message is out there, that picture is out there, it's out there.
Forever.
It's not coming back.
I know. And they're losing jobs. I'm hearing about people routinely losing jobs because of something put on Facebook years ago, or something they put on, I don't know what, LinkedIn or whatever it is. And
there's a whole new website, series of websites called revenge porn.
What's that? Revenge porn.
Well, you've
submitted this is another one I don't know.
Oh, now ex-boyfriends or ex-girlfriends. Oh,
and
wow,
now
that's
you
awful.
Post these images.
Wow.
And I think there is an unrealization that, the internet was designed in a different way, so you can't quite. You can't.
There's no take backs in the internet. It's out there. It's like it's unleashed. I read something in your book too that I thought was kind of interesting, that kids are learning about sex online more than anything else now. And so my question is, how young? I mean, at what age should you start talking to your kids about sex? Because they're going to get online by 10 or 11. So, and how would you, as a pediatrician, recommend they engage in that first sex talk?
So again, a big misconception that parents have, that sex education is that one semester course in 8th grade, and that's going to teach my kids about sex. Sex education is lifelong. It begins with what you say when you change your baby's diaper. Is that a penis or a pee-pee? Is that a vagina or a boo-boo? It continues with whether you have an open door, bathroom door policy, whether you walk around the house naked or not, whether you cuddle with your significant other. That's sex education. Kids are getting sex education throughout their lifespan, throughout childhood, and they're getting it in the media, but they're also getting it from their parents, and parents don't understand and recognize that. The easiest thing for parents to do is to talk to their kids while they're watching a TV show, and instead of the big talk when the kids turn 10 or 12 or 13, you say, when they're 8, why is she dressed like that? Why are they jumping into bed with each other? Why aren't they talking about using birth control? And sex education, the big talk becomes 100 little talks.
And the assumption is, when they are alone and they have their mobile device and they come in contact with the information, that sort of it's called co-viewing, parental mediation, now has an effect for them to look at these messages and images much, much differently and come up with counter arguments, remember what mom and dad said, and to be able to deal with them. And we find, those types of interventions work with sexual material, with stereotypes, with aggression, with a whole host of things. If you can just get parents to do it.
And one of the funny things, when I was in Europe, I think I was in Paris or Amsterdam,
Yeah.
when I was at the cash register checking out, and right there where we have our gum was a big box of condoms. And it struck me as, wow, I was a little bit like uncomfortable for just a minute, and I thought, well, wait a minute, at least that makes it a normal part of life, as opposed to putting it back in the shelves in the back of the store. We have to go back and kind of hide, because people are embarrassed about it. It needs to change.
Well,
we need to start having a
uniquely-
more European attitude
Right,
towards
that is
sex and
uniquely
sexuality.
American. We have the idea that if you give kids access to birth control, it will make them more sexually active. Or if you advertise
Is there any
birth
research
control.
supporting
it's,
that?
it's the exact opposite.
I
That
would
if you
think
give
so.
kids access to birth control, they'll use birth control. I mean, this
Well, then
isn't
they have to
rocket
think about
science.
sex ahead of time, which maybe actually inhibit them a little bit. It's the spur of the moment, no contraception, in the dark of the backseat of a car or whatever, that's what's going on. And at least if they had contraception, they'd have to stop and think about it. I don't know the answer, but I know that the teen sexual disease rate is out of
It's
control.
hard to censor hormones. So, they're going to be aroused. They're going to be curious. They're going to be searching for material. So the question for the parent is, where do you want it to come from?
Right. If you're not talking to your kids about sex,
Somebody else is.
And it could be a
Absolutely.
pedophile online, so you don't want that. Well, thank you again so much for coming. I've so enjoyed meeting you, and I know you traveled a long way to come, and I really appreciate you guys are awesome. Thank you so much for watching Meet the Professors. I'm your host, Dina Pollard-Sachs, and stay tuned for our next show where we will continue to tell you the truth about the research and what you need to know.